Okay, we're on the home stretch, so hang with me. I was trying to make your lecture around an hour. That way you had some time to do your discussion board. I didn't feel like you need to spend extra time doing that. I wanted it to be incorporated in that 2 hours that I'm expecting of you for week 5 participation points. So I tried to keep the lecture relatively short to give you time to now turn around and do those discussion board things. And I don't think all of that will take any longer than a typical class period. Let's move on now to phonemic or phonological awareness. There is things like phoneme isolation, where again we're talking about these metalinguistic abilities to think about language. And I gave you some of these examples earlier when we were talking about phonemic awareness tasks, but some more specific examples here. Tell me the first sound in paste. P. That would require them to be thinking about language. Phoneme identity. Tell me the sound that is the same in bat, baby, and bell. And you want them to say B. Again, you want them to say the sound. Look, you're not saying tell me the first letter. You're not telling me the letter that is in the same. Not that they can't say both, but you also want them to get to that sound. So they could say B or B. Phoneme categorization. Which word does not belong? Bus, bun, or rug. And this is just requiring them to understand categories. If a child has a language disorder, one area that we see is they just have a really hard time understanding categories, like what makes a food, what's furniture, what is, fruits versus vegetables even. Phoneme blending. And here's where you would just say the sounds for you, and you'd say, what word am I saying? All. And see if they could think about that and put it all together and retrieve a word that sounds familiar to them. Oh, I think you're saying school. And then phoneme segmentation. How many phonemes, again, sounds, not letters, are in ship? So we would say sh, I, p. There are 3. And there's all kinds of tasks, especially in early childhood, that you can do to make this really fun, all these kind of activities. But that meta-linguistic ability, if they don't have it in their school age years, they still need it. And so all these ways are ways we can help them think about language. And these are also ways that we can kind of screen. Are they where they should be? Can they do these tasks? Now, sometimes during this chapters, I have us do an in-class activity. But you guys aren't going to do that today, and that's okay. But just to practice some of these things, both giving the screener and answering the questions. Again, discussion. So let's think a little bit about how does language development in syntactic and semantic skills, so grammar and vocabulary skills, relate to literacy success? How does literacy success relate to syntactic and semantic skills? Because they are reciprocal. They are both important to each other. They're not just one way. It's reciprocal. Their importance and their value to the other. And what can you do to help? So to answer that first question, how does language development in those areas of grammar and vocabulary relate to literacy success? We just know that all those early reading skills that we were talking about in the areas of grammar and vocabulary before, that equals reading comprehension and literacy success, specifically reading comprehension, which is one reason it's included on the kindergarten screener. Remember when I was saying we were asking them to repeat sentences? It's so much more than just about their language. That can also tell you about their literacy skills. And then semantically, we know that vocabulary and their ability to understand context clues, to understand stories and draw meaning from stories, that all matters if they're going to be able to read and comprehend what they're reading. And then transversely, how does literacy success relate to grammar and vocabulary skills? We just know that the more you're exposed, the more you can read, the more your grammar and vocabulary grows. That's what I'm saying when we switch from learning to read to reading to learn. If they are already behind, then they're going to have a hard time continuing to grow their vocabulary and grammar when they can't read it and take it in. When I was really young, I was in a spelling bee, and my dad loves this story. Not that he didn't have faith in me, but I had won my school spelling bee and I was at the regional contest. And I guess he asked my teacher, like, why is she such a good speller? And I'm like, hey, why didn't he just think I was brilliant? But one of the first questions my teacher asked him was, does Megan read a lot? And I did, and I still do. My nose is always in a book. And the teacher said, think about how often she sees words. If she has just exposed herself to more words and them correctly spelled, then she just has an easier time retrieving that. And there is more to it than that, but I just think that's so true. It's just one example, but when kids don't get the extra practice that their classmates do just because they're not getting that reading input to solidify vocabulary and grammar patterns, it's to their disadvantage. So what are we going to do to help? We're going to expose them to specific tasks, maybe focusing specific on areas that they're struggling in the grammar or in their vocabulary. But we're also just going to make sure they have positive literacy experiences starting where they are at developmentally. And we're going to talk a lot about that as we get into these chapters, starting to dig into different disabilities and how language may be impacted. But you're always going to be trying to think, how can I get this individual with this disability really involved in literacy? And there are so many reasons why we need that. Not only for just to have that inclusion with their peers, but their literacy success relates back to their language success. Okay. Also, I know I say okay a lot. I'm aware of this as I've been recording and listening to myself, so I apologize. Interventions. I have given you a few things, and this is just a few. I mean, if we went into specific interventions about each area, it would be a book full. And those are things that you're really going to learn more and more in class. And as you go, to your student teaching, you're going to see how teachers, what materials they use. But just a couple ideas for you, things I've used in the past and I've used with classroom teachers. Remember I was talking about non-literal language and how hard that is for a lot of kids and how it's a higher level language function. One thing I highly encourage people to do is have a joke of the day or joke of the week if it's too much to switch. And then, there could be some reward for them guessing and some reward for the person that gets it right. But it would do so much for them just in the area of non-literal language to learn, an idiom or whatever, because often a joke is a play on words. And so I just highly encourage you to do that. If you really think about, there are several state learning standards you would cover. There are lots of kids, not just those identified as being disabled, who could use that language input and that language skill. And when could you implement it? Again, I think if you just implemented it weekly into your morning meeting, or sometimes I've seen people do this as like an exit ticket, maybe when they're leaving at the end of the day, what's your guess for the joke? It could be while you're waiting in the lunch line, waiting at the bathrooms. I mean, there's so much time that you could incorporate this into. And so I gave you this, Teachers Pay Teachers, you can get on there and find all kinds of things, but they do have a joke of the week I think that product was free even. But I just highly encourage you to do that. Plus, it's pretty fun to hear kids say the answers to jokes. It's pretty amazing. Another tool I really like is the Story Grammar Marker. There's actually a video on YouTube. I highly encourage you to go look at this. It's essentially a tactile rope, and it has different things on that rope that represents different part of the story, different parts of a narrative. But if that's really hard for kids, and they need to be able to draw understanding from them and they're going to be expected to use them, this is one way to help them know visually, okay, I need to start with an introduction and I need to know the setting and I need to know the characters. And there's just symbols. And one reason I really like this is because it's tactile, so even those who are visually impaired can use it. Plus, I think kids just like a change. And so instead of just writing those things on the board, they just really seem to respond well to this tool. And so again, it's called the Story Grammar Marker. It's really well laid out. I really encourage you to look it up. I put a link here for you to go back to on YouTube. And if it's too expensive, or your school doesn't have it, it's not something you couldn't consider making a spin-off on your own. But they just really seem to like this tool. That's been my experience. So I wanted to mention it. And another thing that I used and I really liked, Teachers Pay Teachers, again, it's just a lifesaver, but they have this bundle and it made like 2 full notebooks, like 2 or 3 inch notebooks worth of materials. I would just print that off and put it in page covers with all kinds of different phonemic awareness tasks, ways that you can use it as a screener, ways that you can, like actual tools for intervention, actual activities for intervention. I don't know. I'm sure there are all kinds of great products on the market, but just when I was looking for something for my materials, this is what I use, and I have been extremely, extremely pleased with it. So just a few things I wanted to throw out there as you're building your toolbox, your teacher's toolbox. Again, can't tell you, listen to your questions right now, but before you forget them, write them down or shoot me an email so I can address any questions you have after kind of reviewing everything in our time today. And I think that's it. I didn't put on this slide, this slideshow, I'm just realizing I usually give you a little reminder. But of course, by next week, I'm trying to do the date in my head. So by the 15th in the evening, you need to have turned in your quiz for chapters 5 and 6. And you need to try and read chapter 7 before you come to class on Thursday. And be working on those language samples and language analysis. I believe I gave you 2 weeks. It won't be due next week. It'll be due the following week, if I'm correct. But just make sure that you go ahead and start working on it so I can get your questions answered and you can get all your points. Because, again, I'm all about the trying here, the will, not necessarily the skill. And so I'm going to need to know that you've tried. And so, if you've come to me with a question before you turn it in, and you turn it in and there's still some things wrong, I'm going to know you did give it your best shot. And I'm not going to be as concerned if I don't hear from you until, an hour before it's due. That's not really the appropriate time of seeking help, and it doesn't really show me that you've, given it your best shot. Set aside, some time to try and focus on that. So I'll always work with you, but I do consider those things. That's all I have for you. I hope you guys are well, and I'll see you next week.